So today we're going to cover two sections, and the first section is going to deal with the visualization of output data. And as a part of this, we're going to show you a few different ways to view results for links, nodes, and for vehicles. And then we're also going to go over how to add labels to different network objects and how to use the quick view window to just quickly view information about a selected object. And then finally, in this section, we're going to review how to create and display some of that data using some of the built-in charting features. So we're going to start off with links, which have three different options for visualization. The first here is coloring the links based on an attribute value, such as speed. And then the second option here is to apply different link bars, which are going to have varying width based on an attribute. In this case, we're showing volume. And then the third is using a combination of both of these. So in this case, the links are themselves colored by speed, and then the link bars are also added where the width is varied by volume, and then the link bars themselves are also colored based on density. So we're going to show you how to configure both the coloring options and the link bar options and how those can both be used together. So all of the configuration we're going to go through today for any of the visualization is going to be done through graphic parameter windows. And each of the network objects have their own graphic parameters window. So in this case, we're going to start off first with the link option. So in the network object toolbar, if you go up to the top next to links, if you go over to the far right, there'll be a small box that you can select. And once you left click on that, it's going to go ahead and open up the graphic parameters window for the links. And a lot of these windows have a lot of other options for display. So you'll see here we've got some label options, things for different coloring for the fill and borders. But right now we're just going to focus on this section here outlined in red. And this is where all of the configuration is done for both the link colors and for the link bars. And the first item up here at the top of this section is for the drawing mode. And this by default is set to use the display type for any of the coloring. But you can also change this to either use constant colors, which will just be a set color here, set up with this fill color in the border, so you can have everything set to be the same. Or you can also select the use color scheme option. And that's going to be what you can set up to color the links based on an attribute. And then if you are going to use that color scheme option, there's additional configuration here in the color scheme configuration item. And then all of the options dealing with the link bars are stored here in this link bar drawing mode item. And this can be set, by default will be set to no link bars, so it's just going to show the links as is. But you can also choose to have that set to either show the link bars themselves, or you can have it set up to show both the links and the link bars together. And then finally, if you are going to use those link bars, there is a link bar configuration option as well, which will allow you to set up the attributes to use and some of the different coloring options. Okay, so now we're going to go through an example for setting up some of those link colors. In this case, we're going to be doing the link colors based on the speed attribute. So for any of the link coloring options, the first thing will be to adjust that drawing mode to use color scheme. And then once that's selected, the option right below it will then allow you to configure that color scheme configuration. So once you have use color scheme selected, there'll be a little ellipses that will show up over here on the right, which you can then select. And once that's selected, that will allow you to this edit window to appear where you can further configure the settings. So in this case, you'll see here up at the top, we've got a couple of different classification options. So the first here is for either setting the classification based on the link lane or based on the link segments. And depending on which of these you select will determine which attributes will then allow you to select down below. So in this case, if you do have the lane selected, this, for example, will allow you to reference attributes for things like blocked vehicle classes, display types, and behavior types. Because this is just based on the lanes, this has a bit of a smaller set of attributes that you can select from. However, if you select the segment option, this will allow you to access many additional attributes. So in this case, this is where you can find information about the link speed, link density, and link volume. So in this case, we're going to choose that segment option, and then that will allow us to select that speed attribute. And this will also allow you to set up, you can select speed for different runs. So in this case, we have the speed set up to pull information from the current run and the current time interval for all vehicle classes. But there's a lot of different options available for any of these attributes. So you can choose other things like a specific time interval. You can pull averages, min or max values. And you can also look at this for specific vehicle classes as well. So a lot of different options depending on how you want those link colors to be set up. All right, this will then take us down into the bottom half, and this is where all of the actual color configuration takes place. And if you select the color selector here on the right side, this will allow you to choose a lot of predefined options that exist. So here you can see there are some regular color schemes from red to green or green to red, but there's also some options here for speed, density, volume, and some relative lost time. And if you select any of those, that will actually automatically populate this class bound and color window here. And it's going to already configure both the lower and the upper bound and then the associated color. So you can always start from one of these options if you want, and then you can always adjust any of the bounds or the color options. You can also, in the white space of this window, if you right click, you can then add. So you can add in additional items, or you can just create your own and set up your own colors. And then once you have everything done and set up, you can then just click OK, and that will save all of the changes, and then we'll update all of those graphic settings. All right, so next we're going to take a look at the configuration that's required to display any of the link bars. So the first item here again is going to be using that link bar drawing mode. And this will allow you to view either the link bars on their own, if you select link bars only, and that will actually make the links invisible, so you'll just see the bars. Or you can choose to view both the links and the link bars together. And once you have either of those options selected, you can then complete some additional setup within that link bar configuration option. And once you have that configuration selected, this link bar editing window will open up, and you'll see this is pretty similar to the coloring edit window that we just looked at. So like the link colors, you can choose to either have those link bars represented either on the segment level or in this case on the link level. So there's no lane-based option here. In this case, it'll either be segment-based or link-based. And then again, depending on which of these options you select, will determine which attributes are available for you to select here for the width and for the coloring as well. So the width attribute can then be chosen next. And in this case, we're looking at volume for the current simulation run for the last completed time interval for all of the vehicle classes. And like the speed, you can also vary this as well. So you can choose different averages, maxes, or mins. And you can also look at the current time interval as well. And you can also choose different vehicle classes if you want that width to only look at a very specific option. And also in this middle section here are some other options as well for some of that width scaling. So again, this middle section is all for the width classification. So you can also choose to have that width scaling done automatically, or you can also do it manually and set up some of the min and max options for that scaling. And then this whole bottom section here is going to deal with all of that link bar color classification. So you can choose to have the set to no classification. And in this case, all of the link bars will just be the same base color, and they won't have any variation. Or otherwise, if you do select based on attribute, you can then choose the color attribute down here down below. And this will just allow you to either to color it based on the same or a different attribute as the simulation is running. And then down below is like the link color options. You can also select some predefined color schemes as well, or you can also create your own and set your own boundaries and color settings as well. And then one other thing I wanted to mention as well is that you can also set up different names for each of these boundaries. And these names will actually end up showing up in any legends that you choose to add. And we're going to go over that in more detail a bit later. But if you do type in any of the names, those will show up in the legends just to make it a bit easier to quickly see what some of those boundaries are referencing. All right, so our next network object visualization here is for the nodes. And the nodes have two main visualization options. The first here is for visualizing values based on the turn or turning movement. And this will allow you to display attributes for each of those movements within a node. So in this case, this particular example here on the left is showing different volume information for each turn. So you'll see here that we have link bars for each of the turn movements. And then in addition to that, we also have some numbers down here at the bottom. So in this case, for each of the turns, we're looking at the volume of vehicles that have completed that turn for this particular interval in the simulation. So you can see here for the northbound right, we've got about 18 vehicles, I think, northbound through 180, and so on. So each of these smaller numbers represent the value associated with that particular turn movement. And then there's also a larger section here which kind of adds up and sums together that volume. So total for the northbound is 402. So this just allows you to quickly see some of those turning value information. And then the bars themselves are also scaled by width, again, based on those values that are set down here. And then the second option for the nodes is to view queue length information. So you can see here we've got, in this case, the queues are just set up in black. So these are just showing you what that queue length ended up being. You can show this for either average queue length or maximum queue length. And in addition to setting this up on the nodes, you can also set this up for queue counters as well. So if you had any queue counter objects placed in your network, they have the configuration is exactly the same, just done on the queue counter object instead of the node object. So like links, all the node configuration is going to be done by left-clicking on that graphic parameters box next to nodes in this case. And once you have that selected, that will bring up that node graphic parameters window. So the node configuration we're going to cover today is going to be all down here in this bottom section. And this has a couple options up here for that turn value. And then all of the rest down here are for the queue length. So in order to show those turn value graphics, the first thing you'll want to do is find that show turn value visualization option, and then you can just check that check box. And over on the right here, you'll see that little ellipses. And if you click on that, that will allow you to further refine those settings for those turn values. So once you click that option, this is the turn value visualization window. And this will allow you to select those movement attributes. So in here you can see we've got the vehicles for the current simulation run for the last completed time interval for all vehicle classes. And you can change this to other movement attributes. So some other things that movements contain are going to be, in addition to the number of vehicles, will be any simulation-based vehicle delay, stop delay, and also some of the queuing information as well. So you can choose any of those. And similar to the link bars, this whole section here will deal with that width scaling that shows up for those turn bars. And then down at the bottom is where you can also choose to color those turn values if you would like to. So you can, by default, this is going to be set to no classification. So again, those are just going to reference that base color. But you can also change this to based on an attribute, and then you can select that attribute and then further define those color boundaries and the color options down here accordingly. So if you're looking to display the queue length within the network, those will have their own options. So there's going to be a checkbox that you can select next to show queue length, and that will just turn on that queue length feature. And from there, you can then go directly down to the queue length attribute. And again, there'll be a little ellipses here once the show queue length is turned on, that you can then select to update which attribute you want to view. So once you have that selected, it's going to open up a movement window where you can select any of those movement attributes. So you can choose here either any of information about the average queue length or maximum queue length. And again, you can choose this for current simulation run, for a particular simulation run. You can look at averages, min or max, and you can also look at different intervals. So you can see here we have some intervals broken up. So we've got every 900 seconds a time interval set up. So you could pull that for a particular interval, or you can look at it overall as an average as well. And then the next option here is for setting up any of the coloring. So this particular item will just allow you to pick the color that will be shown for any of those queues in the network. And then finally, you can also choose an option to turn a queue length label on or off. And what this queue length label does is, in addition to displaying the queue length, again, which will be shown based on that color that's been selected, the label will show up at the end of the queue length and will display that actual value and speed. So you can either choose to have that label turned on or off with that final option there. All right, and so the next visualization topic here we have is looking at the vehicles in the network. So the vehicles can be colored either randomly based on a color distribution that's been set up, or you can also have them display some specific data. In this case here on the left, we have the vehicle's driving state displayed. So here you can see we also have a legend set up, so you can see what some of those driving states are. Most of them deal with vehicles making a lane change if they're waiting for a lane change, wants to make a lane change, or currently changing lanes, or has just completed changing lanes. And there's also some information about the vehicle when they're braking, and also some platooning information. And then you can also display vehicle information as well over on the right-hand side by just looking at a particular attribute. So here again, you can look at information about the vehicles themselves, so things such as the speed, information about the vehicle type, or even information about the vehicle route. And so again, you can see here, in this case on the right, we're just showing the vehicle speed, which also has a legend here, just showing what some of those bounds and those colors are representing. So in order to configure any of the vehicle visualization, you'll just need to go to that network object toolbar and then go and find the vehicles in network option, which will be down near the bottom. And over here is when you can also just left click on that box over on the right-hand side. And that will allow you to configure any of those vehicle graphic parameters. So most of the vehicle visualization options are located here and outlined in red. And so this is where you can select some different drawing modes. So the default is going to be just set to color based on that color distribution. So that will just pull random colors from a distribution that's been set up. Or you can also choose some other options, such as use the color scheme, which will allow you to set up the colors based on that attribute if you wanted to look at vehicle speed. Or you can also look at, again, that driving state. And there's also newer option for the parking state as well. And the parking state one, we'll probably talk about that a bit more in detail when we go over some of the parking features within Vissim in a future session. And then if you are going to use that color scheme option, there is a color scheme configuration setting directly below that, which will allow you to edit, again, those attributes and the colors for that particular color scheme. So in order to color any of the vehicles based on the driving state, this just requires one particular setting. So in the drawing mode option, you'll just need to change the setting here to color by driving state. And in this case, this has all of the colors predefined and set up, so no further configuration is required. And as soon as you change it to this option, all of the vehicles will begin updating their color by the driving state. And one other nice thing that's nice about any of these graphic parameters is that these can be changed at any point in time while the simulation is running. So as it's running, you can go ahead and update any of the vehicle coloring options. So if you wanted to change from driving state to look at speed information, you can do that while the simulation is running without having to stop and restart the simulation. And then if we take a look at the color scheme configuration, this is where you'd want to change that drawing mode to use color scheme. And once that's been selected, you can then go down into that color scheme configuration, and you can select the little ellipses that will show up to allow you to further configure that color scheme. So this will allow you to, again, select a vehicle attribute in this case. So this will allow you to select things like speed, acceleration, vehicle type, routing information, and this will also allow you to set up if you had any user-defined attributes set up. So if you had a UDA set up for a vehicle, you can also choose those as well to set up any of the coloring options. And like all of the other options we've looked at so far, all of the coloring is going to take place in the lower half. And again, you can choose from some of those predefined color schemes, mainly for acceleration and speed. Or you can also further define or create any of your custom boundaries and color options as well. All right, so now that we've kind of looked at visualization for the links, nodes, and vehicles, this next section here is going to cover setting up some of the legend display, which is really useful once you have either one object being colored in a certain way, or if you have multiple objects being colored together. So this will just allow you, again, to show a legend in the lower right-hand corner of the network editor, and this will allow you just the ability to quickly map some of those colors to that corresponding value. And the legend display requires a couple of steps to get this set up. And the first will involve choosing what data you want to show up in the legend. So any network object with any color options will contain an item within that graphic parameter window, and it will be titled something like legend includes, and then something related to that particular object. So in this case, we are looking at the vehicles in the network. So you'll see here that particular item is called legend includes vehicle colors. So in here is where you can just check that option, and that will tell Vissim that you want the vehicle coloring to be included in that legend. So once you have that checked, then the next item to go and do is to go back to the network editor. And if you go up to that toolbar at the top of the network editor, there's going to be an option for displaying the legend there as well. And you'll see here it's like it looks like a piece of paper with a checklist on it. And if you click that, you can turn that on or off. to show that legend in that bottom right corner of the network editor. And again, you can choose multiple items to add to the legend, so which is pretty useful if you have, maybe if you're coloring vehicles by one thing, or maybe coloring link bars. You can choose to have as many of those show up in the legend as you'd like. You'll just have to go into each of the network objects and make sure you have that legend include button selected. And then what's going to happen is that those will show up side by side here within that network editor. And each one will kind of have its own box with the name of the object and then also the attribute that is being pulled for that color scheme configuration. Okay, so the next topic here we'd like to cover is adding labels to objects within the network editor. And the labels are really useful for building networks so you can see different object values. This is particularly useful for when you're adding any signal groups or signal heads into the network. You can see what signal group is associated with those signal heads. You can see things like the detector port number, any distributions that the desired speed decisions or reduced speed areas are adding or using. So any of those labels are really useful for building the network. Labels can also be a useful tool as well for displaying values as the simulation is running. So in this case, for this particular example, we're going to look at displaying some information for data collection points, but any of the network objects have the ability to turn the labels on or off as well. So in the network object toolbar, if you select that particular item or object that you're looking to turn the label on, if you see there's a bit of white space that exists between the object name and the graphic parameters option. And if you hover over this, there'll be a little A that will show up as you hover over it. And if you select that, that will turn that label on or off for that particular network object. And once you have that label turned on, if you then click on the box to the right to open up that associated graphic parameter window, that will also show you additional label configuration that can be done. And most of those are near the top of that graphic parameter window, which is shown here outlined in red. And this will allow you to configure things like the label color. You can change label font size and the number of decimal places that are shown, as well as the particular attribute that's being displayed. And by default, a lot of those attributes are going to just show the number, which is just going to show up as NO for its short name. But again, you can just click on any of those and you can select some other options from the attribute list that you'd like to display. And in this case, again, this can be really useful if you're looking at kind of results as the simulation is running. So in this case, since we're looking at data collection points, if you want to show maybe the number of vehicles that are crossing a particular section of roadway, you can set that up to display as the simulation is running. So you can kind of see that increment as the vehicles are crossing over this particular point. And in this case, for the data collection points, all of those reference a data collection measurement. So if you go down into the data collection measurement section, you can then choose that corresponding attribute. So in this case, we're just looking at the average number of vehicles for the current run for that current time interval. And with this setting, this will just allow you to see that value as the simulation is running and just keep track of any vehicles passing that location. And then a final way to view some additional information is also by using that quick view window. And all of the quick view window is in the lower left of the screen underneath the network object toolbar. And this will allow you to view any attribute for any network object that is selected. And this is particularly useful for viewing vehicle information, especially when the simulation is running, just so that you can quickly see information about the vehicle, like its speed, acceleration, its current driving state, so you can kind of see maybe what that vehicle is thinking or different objects that the vehicle is looking at. And you can also see routing information, which is also particularly useful if you're tracking a vehicle and wanting to see where it's heading and why is it going that particular direction. And this allows you to just, again, quickly see that information without having to open up any list and then search for the vehicle that way. So once you have that object selected, any further configuration can be done for that particular object by selecting that wrench icon. And this will allow you to add any additional attributes or remove any unnecessary ones. So here you'll see on the left, again, a list of all available attributes, in this case for vehicles. So you can either double click on any of those, or you can use these arrow keys here to move things over to be displayed in the main window. So you can either move them over or take them away. And you can also select any of these attributes here as well. And you can change the order with the arrows here up at the top. So if you're maybe tracking a particular attribute, like maybe a vehicle's routing decision, you can always move that up to the top of the list just so that it'll show up quickly at the top within that quick view window. Okay, so now we've covered some of the visualization options that are available for the network objects, and we've gone over how to just quickly view that information. So now we're going to turn our attention over to viewing some of these results using some of the built-in charts within Vissim. And these charting features are convenient if you're doing some comparisons or just want to analyze data, especially when the simulation is running, in this case using either line charts or bar charts. So the charts can be created in a couple of different ways. And the first option is to select a particular network object. So if you're maybe looking to create a chart for queue counters, if you select that from the network object toolbar and then right click on that, you can then select create chart. Or the other option is to go to the view menu up at the top, and then you can select create chart from there. And in this case, this won't be tied to any particular object. It'll just create a new blank chart that you can then start from. So once you have that create chart option selected, this will then open up this create chart window, which will allow you to set up and configure that chart. So the first item up at the top that you can select is the chart type. You can either set that to line or column. And then you can change or select the network object type that this particular chart will be referencing. And if you selected that create chart option from the network object toolbar, this will automatically fill in that particular object. So in this case, you can see it's already referencing the queue counter. Or you can always change this. So if you decided you wanted to maybe look at a data collection measurement instead, you can just click this drop down, and this will open up a list of every network object, and you can just choose from there as well. Okay, so then once you have that selected, now we kind of have to set up what network objects within the queue counters you would want to be included, as well as the attribute you want to include in the chart as well. So if you go down to the bottom, the first thing you'll want to do is just click on the network object option, and then you can click the plus button over here on the right in order to add some of those network objects. So once you click that plus button, this will open up another window, which will allow you to select any of those objects that exist in the network. So you can either select a few of these, or if you want to, you can highlight all of them, and then you can click OK, and that will create a chart for each of these objects. And then from there, if you select the attributes option, you can then again click attributes and then the plus button. And that will allow you to choose which attributes should be displayed within the chart. So in this case, since you're looking at queue counters, this is just going to pull the maximum queue length, and it's going to look at an average across all of the simulation runs. And then there's also some further configuration that can be done. So you can either choose to have the x-axis look at that particular attribute, Or you can also change that, and in this case have the x-axis reference the simulation runs. So this will show you information for each of the runs if you're kind of looking to see how that changed over the simulation runs, or just to see if things are pretty consistent. You can also look at the information by time interval or by vehicle class. And in order to view any of the specific information, you'll just want to make sure that in this on-off column that you have that checked, and then you have the x-axis selected, and then you can choose all if you want. So in this case, you can see both the car and HGV that show up as well. So then once you have everything configured and set up, you can then select OK. And this will then add the chart to the bottom of the network editor. So if you selected any charts that reference an attribute for a current interval, those charts are going to update as the simulation is running, and this will just allow you to see how that data is changing over time. Otherwise, you can also use this to plot averages, min and max information, which can be useful, especially once that simulation is run, and especially if you're doing a set of runs, maybe you've got 10 speeds, you can then average up that information and display it in the chart. And each of the charts, as you create them, they're all going to have a toolbar up here at the top. And this will allow you to further edit the chart attributes. So this wrench will just open up that same window we just went through if you did want to change any of the information being displayed. You can also configure the chart itself, so you can change the chart background color, update the chart title, move around the legend that shows up, or turn it off. You can also update how that grid is displayed, or change the information that's being shown on the X or the Y axis. And then you can also update any data series information. So this will allow you to in the drop-down, it will allow you to select a particular data series. So for example, if in the chart window, if you had selected maybe queue length average, and then also selected an attribute for queue length max, this will allow you to configure information for each of those data series options. So you can change things like the, if you're doing a bar graph, you can change the column colors. You can change it from a column to a line chart. You could have one attribute be a bar chart and one reference the line charting functionality. So this will just allow you to further configure the options for each of those data series. And then finally, you can also copy those charts to a clipboard, or you can take a screenshot if you want to save any of these images or add them into a presentation. Okay, so from here, let's go ahead and take a look at our example file before we move into the next section regarding data import. So in this example, I've got the simulation running. I have some intervals for the evaluation set up every 900 seconds. So some of the objects should now start showing some coloring. So I'll just go through a few of those options that we just talked about. So for the links, I'll just go in here to the link graphic parameters, and I'll just change this to use color scheme. And again, for this one, right now we have that set up to look at the link segments. And again, the segments are going to reference any of those link evaluation segments that you've set up. And again, those are by default set to about 32 feet. But again, you can always change those. In this case, this model has them set up for the link as a whole. So you'll see some of the links are just one single color. But you can also set up those segments to be those smaller sections, and then you see different colors for each of those segments. And again, if you want to change any of those attributes, here's where you can see all of the different options. You can see there's quite a few, especially for segments, and a lot of different options depending on how many intervals you have set up. If you've got different vehicle types or classes that you're selecting or collecting data for, you can choose those. You can choose information for average, standard deviation, min or max, and also even for any percentile information. You can also see here, I just have the first simulation run is currently going. But if you did want to look at information for a particular run, those will show up down here at the bottom with the run number. So in this case, this will be for simulation run number 1. And again, here's where you can choose any of those predefined color schemes, or you can change any of those boundaries as well if you wanted any of those to change. And you'll notice as the simulation is running, this will update some of the colors once we get to the 1800 second mark as it switches from one interval to the next, because that particular speed attribute is just looking at that current simulation interval. So you can see here starting to recalculate, and you'll notice that some of the roads don't have any vehicles on them yet. So as a vehicle starts to travel over those links, any of those gray locations will be colored in based on that speed. So this is a really great tool, especially when you're doing any model calibration. If you are comparing or want to see what the speeds are, maybe if you're looking to compare some of the historic Google speed plots, you can kind of do a comparison and look at particular time intervals as the simulation is running, or even after the simulation has run. Okay, and then from here, again, if you want to include any of those in a legend, you'll see here we've got a couple of legend options within the link, one for the link colors, and then one also for link bars. And in order to show up those legends, you'll just want to make sure you've got that legend option selected in the network editor toolbar. And then I'll also go back into links here and set up some of those link bars. So I'll just choose link and link bars. This will get a bit busy as I have the link colors still turned on. But you can see here we've got the link bar set up to look at the volume. And this will be the volume for the last interval. You can also look at it for the current interval as well if you want to see how that volume looks currently. And you can also, again, change that to have different colors if you want to. By default, this will just be set to density. But I'll just leave this turned off for now so it doesn't get too busy. But you'll see here we've got some of those link bars showing up where you can see just quickly where some of the more traveled roads are located. And for the link bars, again, they also have a legend option. This won't be super exciting right now just because we have them all set to that base color. But you can see here how those legends will just show up side by side if you want to add multiple legends to that toolbar. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off some of those link options, and then we can go ahead and look at some options for the nodes. Okay, so I'll turn off the legends as well. So again, for the nodes, we can set up the turn value visualization. Here we go. So again, if I select that turn value visualization, in this case, we're looking at the number of vehicles for the current run for the current time interval. And I'll zoom in here because I know some of the numbers get pretty small, but here's where you can see maybe in a bit more detail where some of those turn values come from. So you can see for vehicles making eastbound, so far we're at 83 vehicles for the current interval. And then we've got about 16 making that eastbound left. And then you can see the total number as well down here. So this is just a quick way to see especially the volume information for any of those nodes as well. And then in addition to those turn values, you can also show the queue length. And I'll maybe change the queue length to a brighter color so it's a bit easier to see. And then let me also check the attribute, because I think this is just looking at the overall average. So if you do want this to update as the simulation is running, you'll just want to choose either the current interval or the last complete interval, depending on what data you want to look at. But here's where you can see some of those queue lengths showing up as the simulation is running. And we've got those labels turned on so you can see that data as well. And then finally, for the vehicles, you can also, again, change that drawing mode. Right now, you can see the vehicles are just randomly colored based on the color distribution. But again, you can change those to driving state. You can see any of the white vehicles, those vehicles are stopped. And again, this is one where that turning on that legend option is particularly useful. So that way you can see what the vehicles are doing. And then again, you can also change that to use color scheme as well if you wanted to change that to look at the vehicle speed or also any other information. You can see vehicles have a lot of different attributes that you can select from. All right. And again, as you can see, all of these graphic parameters can be changed while the simulation is running, so there's no need to stop the simulation at all. The charts are a bit different. Those cannot be configured while it's running. You can start to create some of them, but let me just stop the simulation here really quick, and then maybe I'll go through the view menu here just to create a chart. And in this case, you can see since I went through the view menu, the network object type does not automatically populate. So you can see here, there's a lot of different objects you can choose from. In this case, maybe I'll just choose the data collection measurement. And again, once you have that set up, you can then choose which measurement you would want included. If you just click the upper left corner, you can select all of them. And then once you have those selected, then you can just add the attributes. You'll see here too that a little warning triangle will display for anything that still needs to be added in order for that chart to display. So here's where we can choose other information. Maybe I'll look at number of vehicles for the last completed interval. And as soon as you have that attribute added, that's when some of that data will start to be displayed. In this case, we don't have any other simulation runs fully completed, but if you did, again, you could choose any of those simulation runs, time intervals, or vehicle classes. Or otherwise, you can just look at that particular attribute, in this case, for both of the data collection measurements that we have set up in the network.